The Nest.
We are talking The Nest from 1987. This one is directed by Terence H. Winkless and stars Robert Lansing as our kind of town's mayor. Now, what is the story? Essentially, this is a creature feature clearly influenced by the movie Jaws, because it has a kind of a somewhat similar premise to it. So we have a small kind of American town somewhere that's actually an island, and it kind of relies on kind of tourist business and things like this. Robert Lansing kind of plays our corrupt mayor, and he's made a deal with this kind of local company where they are able to do some type of experimentation on cockroaches for reasons that will be explained in the movie. And of course this experiment kind of goes wrong and turns these cockroaches into kind of man-eating killer bugs that are able to do the Thing type body horror as the kind of in the movie's climax as well. And it falls down to the local sheriff to try and put a stop to all this, with a couple of assists from a couple of other locals as well, and we get lots of bug horror. What'll happen? You'll have to watch and find out. So let us discuss The Nest. Again, this was a movie I had back in the VHS days, and when I watched it back then, I thought this was quite a hardcore movie in regards to some of the kind of the effects and things like that. Watching it now, it kind of it's obviously looked quite tame, but back then I thought it was fairly gruesome. So what works in this movie? I think Robert Lansing's always an interesting kind of actor, because I always feel he plays the roles dead straight. And this movie, I think, is a little campy in places, to be honest, but because Robert Lansing is, he's not the main character, but he certainly kind of like has this commanding kind of presence, and he takes it so seriously, it makes it an interesting kind of dichotomy. But I think with some of the kind of the more campy aspects, for example, this kind of exterminator, who is kind of quite a fun character, I have to say. It was probably my favourite character in the movie, and apparently a lot of his lines were kind of just ad-libbed and things like this. And as such, he becomes, has this kind of quite kind of natural, sort of fun kind of vibe and kind of thing. You kind of wanting to survive, and that was quite fun. They've used, in this movie as well, they've used a lot of kind of like real kind of cockroaches and things like this. And we see sequences with people with cockroaches on them and all that kind of stuff. It's not a particularly gruesome film, if I'm being completely honest watching it now. It is just kind of people with blood on them and things like this. We do get a bit of interesting kind of practical effects in the kind of the last 15 minutes, and there it goes into kind of more body horror territory, where we see these cockroaches mutate into its victims. So we get a kind of a cat cockroach, and we get a couple of like humanoid ones, and a kind of a big kind of like monster at the end, which is, design wise is pretty interesting. I don't think it quite compares to its contemporaries, to be honest with you. But again, when I was watching this back in the original VHS days, I was kind of quite impressed with it. It does follow quite a similar template to the movie Jaws, to be honest, but that's not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, because Jaws is a good template to kind of copy from, admittedly, and thus makes it for quite an interesting kind of plot and movie, albeit it's kind of pretty kind of predictable. I think our leading man, the sheriff, doesn't an acceptable job. I don't think he's particularly kind of memorable as our main character, but I think he's fine here. And there are a couple of memorable scenes. Certainly we have a scene where there's these cockroaches are in like a diner, and we have our waitress kind of using all the kind of facilities of the diner to try and take these kind of cockroaches out. So what doesn't work? Yeah, it is so derivative of kind of a Jaws movie. It reminds me a little bit of Ticks, which obviously came a little later than this one. So it's kind of a cross between those two movies in some ways. But the basic kind of plot line of Jaws is clearly apparent. It's obviously just taking a page from a successful movie and trying to kind of apply a fresh kind of coat of paint on it. So it does have a little lacking of originality here. The finale, in some ways it's quite impressive of this kind of bizarre kind of creatures that we kind of see, but when you compare it to movies like, for example, like The Thing, and even kind of lower budget ones and the likes of kind of Leviathan and movies like that, The Rift, which have kind of similar grotesque kind of monsters and things, it really doesn't kind of hold a candle to these. And the kind of the movement of this kind of creature is clearly kind of quite mechanical and things like this, and we have kind of people sort of standing just waiting for something to come and grab them and things like this. So I don't feel it's nearly as kind of as polished as kind of those films. And like I've said, I get The Thing was maybe a little bit of a higher profile movie, but even some straight to video movies I think did a kind of a technically a better job than this one, even though I still kind of quite enjoyed the effects here. I think they maybe leave it a little bit too late to introduce all these kind of like the very much the super kind of like cockroaches and things like that. We only really get them in the last 15 minutes, and prior to that it's just kind of your garden variety cockroaches, albeit they're kind of making lots of kind of sounds and things like this that are weird, but it's nothing too kind of fantastical that you'll see on screen. I think it would have been better to maybe have it a little earlier and kind of maybe save your big monster until the end, but we're introduced to, like I said, another kind of humanoid one and a cat monster, all within the last kind of 15 minutes. I think it could have been spread out. Our leading man, as I've said, I don't think he's particularly kind of memorable and seems quite kind of vanilla, to be honest. And I think that's how the movie is really, and how you can best describe it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad film by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's not one that really sticks out, if I'm being completely honest. It's serviceable, certainly for kind of an 80s kind of creature feature, but it has no real kind of identity of its own, I don't think, compared to a lot of the other films that are similar to this. But it's an interesting watch, and I think it's not bad. I think it fails in comparison to its contemporaries, even it's at that kind of similar kind of budget. So that's I'll give this movie a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.